Alright guys, so today I'm going to be talking about how I went about creating this orc male. I'm just going to do an overview of what the final product is. So we have a fully set up character in 3ds Max, rigged using cat, all facial animation controls. I put some armor on him so that you can kind of see what the finished product is. We made all the controls to manipulate the character, including shoulder pad controls here. And I'm just kind of going over and showing kind of what everything looks like. I'm really big into organization too, so if you notice all the layers and everything, it makes working a lot easier, and I highly recommend getting used to doing that. So with this character, orcs have very big poses that they have to meet, so I had to make sure that the hands deformed well, and I had to make sure that the neck was rather stretchy, because necks on the orcs tend to go out quite a lot. So I think I've accomplished that. Right here I'm going to show off kind of the facial animation controls. Now this is an iterative process. We have eye controls with fleshy eyes, so it kind of moves the eyes around. We have blink controls both left and right. We have eyebrow controls for, just generally up and down, sad, happy. Jaw controls to move the jaw around, stuff like that. I'm not too happy with it. It's pretty good, but I mean, I could do better. But this is just the first iteration of this. I'm sure it'll be better down the road. And for the smile, it's pretty horrific. I couldn't think of a good way to make orcs smile that isn't crazy looking, but I think I got pretty close. And I have a frown there as well. So yeah, a lot went into this. This is going to be about, well, there's 12 and a half hours of footage, and that's sped up to 4,000%, so it's about 18 minutes of video, but you'll be able to see everything I'm doing, and I'm going to commentate over it and kind of explain the steps I'm doing. I realize that this video is probably going to glance over a lot of things and people are going to have a lot of comments, but I mean, 12 and a half hours after completely setting up this character, I don't want to spend another whole bunch of hours, doing the commentary for the tutorial, plus it's, 12 hours of footage to go through, so it's quite a lot, so forgive me if it's a little sloppy, but I'm going to do my best to kind of explain exactly what I'm doing. And if you guys have questions, leave it in the YouTube comments or Reddit or wherever I post this, and I'll try to get to those comments and answer as many questions as I can. Alright, so we're about to fire off here. I'm going to be starting in WoW Model Viewer like I always do. I'm going to be pulling up the orc male model, and what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be turning on all the extra geosets. So that's hair, facial hair, bracers, boots, pants, all the different combinations of armor. I'm going to have that all being displayed before I export the model. That way I can tear it down in 3ds Max and have a modular character. So you can see I'm enabling all the geosets, pull it into 3ds Max. Now I pull it in as an FBX, and there is a skeleton on there already, but I'll just remove that. And right now I'm just cutting the model apart, separating all the pieces, doing my naming conventions and layers. One big thing about WoW models, the OBJ and the FBX aren't the same scale, so you have to kind of find the right scale. So I'm just cleaning up boots right here. There's a lot of WoW models for thin surfaces. They have double faces, like double faces, two-sided faces. So you have to remove those because those do not agree well with renderers, nor do they agree well with smoothing. I'm just exporting the one cloak here, that way I can use it without having to fix all the other one because it's a mess of backwards faces. I'm taking the mouth apart so that the head is attached to the inner lips, and I have the teeth in the inner mouth controlled as one. Basically I'm just pulling everything apart here, and now I'm going to start putting in the bones. So I just did a base human and just set it to a pretty high scale, and now I'm going through and setting up all the positions for where the bones should be. Now nothing is ever finalized, you can always tweak it if you'd like. Right here I'm just messing with the curve that the head and the spine use to actually bend, because with cat it's procedural. For the neck and the back. Putting in the arms here, I do 3 segments each for twists. That way you have good twists. And here's a neat little trick I found for hands. In order to, rather than trying to align all the bones manually, I'll actually just go in, select the edges where it should go, create a shape out of it, center the axis on that shape, and then align the bones to it. There's going to be certain parts in this recording where it just stops for a while. That's probably because I moved away from the computer and forgot to stop the capture. But right here I'm just aligning all the fingers of the bones to those shapes and testing out the bends. I had the thumb backwards there. So there's that all placed. Moving on to working on rigging now. So I usually start with, the legs and go up from there. When you're skinning it, it's very important to take the highest bone in the hierarchy and make sure that that has all the skin weights on it, and you remove any zero weights when you're blending further down. So for example, the lower leg is split into 3 divisions, and I'll take the top part of that division and weight everything 100% to it and block that in, and then go down 1 bone and grab a whole bunch of verts and block those in. It just makes things easier when you're blending. That way your blends don't accidentally go into like a different bone. Here I was just setting up the feet. It was kind of hard because I've been putting off doing an orc for a long time because they're very bulky, and that's very hard to skin properly because there's a lot of interpenetration and problems like that. Since I'm doing it modular, I have to make sure that the vertices at one end match the vertices on the other model. So for example, you see there where the arms meet, I have to make sure that all of those vertices are the same in terms of skin weights. Here I'm just messing with the skinning for the head, the spine. I usually do a quick voxel skin wrap to kind of see how that goes, and then I'll pull out the skin weighting brush and add or remove weights from certain areas or blend them together. Here I'm just doing a quick animation to see how it would all move, and I think it turned out pretty good. I like I like the way it moves. The neck is very stretchy though, and I kind of had a little goofy moment right there. I'm doing under the arms now. Orcs are very, very big, so I had to make sure that the shoulder gets a wide range of motion, and it's going to be moving a lot of mass. So I do a lot of work blending the clavicle with the upper arm to try and make it look as believable as possible. I'm also using open subdiv on these meshes whenever it's time for render time at like 4 iterations, so it gets pretty smooth, and it usually smooths out any weird looking angles or anything like that. So I'm just mirroring some skin weights here. I'm using cat motion to set up a basic kind of walk cycle, so just so I can see how the character moves and which areas are problems. Anytime you're doing skin weighting, you should always be animating while you're doing it, so you can see the areas that are giving you trouble and you can address them now, rather than your animator coming up to you and saying, hey, listen, this skin weight is all crazy and it's not working right. I did have an issue with the chest and the head in this video as well. You'll see multiple times where the color, it just goes to a flat color. I have no idea why it did that, and I eventually fixed it just by importing the geometry again and just copying the skin weights over. I have no idea what caused it. Probably some vertex painting or something. So here I'm doing just looking over everything, seeing how everything moves, seeing which areas need improvement on. I'm just kind of creating a walk cycle in cat motion, have them kind of hunched over. The neck itself, it does have a setting enabled that it's stretchy, and some of the procedural cat stuff doesn't work very well with that, so you'll see me a lot messing with the head. But that's just for the cat motion stuff. When I actually do my animations, I never use the cat motion. I'll always just create my own, so it's not a problem. Here I'm doing the fingers, the skin weighting for the fingers. I always start with the thumb. Like I said, the orcs have very big hands, so I have to make sure that the skin weighting is proper, and the placement of the bones is proper as well. But if you probably can't make it out, but what I do is I grab the top joint of the finger, and I weight the entire finger to that. That way I know if I'm blending between fingers, the hand bone isn't going to be in that equation of skin blending. So I messed around with this for a while, trying to get the skinning on the hands right so I can get those big movements. A lot of WoW characters, their hands aren't really defined. I find that orc males and Draenei males, their hands are very important for animation. They play a big part in it. So I do a lot of work to try and get that right, and you can see me right here just painting some skin weights. Like I said, this video is moving very fast. There's so many topics covered in this, and I'm just hoping to kind of give a brief explanation of what's going on. That way you guys can like look up actual tutorials on each subject. So right now I'm just seeing how the arm moves. There's a lot of issues in terms of skin weighting with the clavicle and the upper arm and stuff like that, but I'm just testing it out, seeing how it's moving, and making sure that everything looks okay. Doing just a quick animation with the hand, seeing how it closes and everything. One problem that I kept running into is whenever I'd mirror the skin weights, there was a part on the neck that would always never mirror over properly, but I fixed that eventually. Here I'm just pulling in my Blood Elf model as reference, and I'm setting up the facial animation controls. So what I did is I created a circle at the back of the eyes, and I aligned these helpers to it, and these two helpers are looking at the other two helpers in front of them, and it's a pretty cool system that allows me to have the eyes look around and also lock onto a target. And that's accomplished with just orientation controllers, look at controllers, and there's a bit of blending between them using Reaction Manager. So it's coming along pretty good now. You'll see me, touch up the skin weighting here and there. I'm doing the jaw now, making sure that everything is blended very well for the jaw to open. And like I said, orcs are really big, so a lot of things are going to get pulled when he opens that jaw, to the point where I even have to blend the jaw into the chest itself and add skin weighting there. So I'm probably not gonna talk throughout this entire thing because it's pretty long, and sometimes you just don't know what to say, but I've been saying that I was going to do a tutorial for a while. I know this isn't really a tutorial, but it kind of shows my process. Just setting up the mouth now, like the inner mouth, so that it works. See, there's a head problem. I tried so many different things to fix it, and then I just exported it back in and out. It gave me a lot of problems. I don't know what was up with that, but hopefully that doesn't happen to you. Even with the head itself, with that stretchiness enabled, it kind of messed a couple of things up. And this just goes to show the limitations that Cat has. Cat is great if you're just starting out, but if you are serious about working in this type of field, you really should learn how to create your own rigs. And I regret not doing it sooner because I'm forced to use this garbage now. Something that could easily be fixed if you had a rig yourself, but oh well, I'll learn it eventually. And if I do learn to make my own rigs, I'd probably just switch to Maya anyway. So I'm creating the facial morph targets now. I'll export the base head and the mouth into ZBrush, and there's all the parts put into ZBrush here. Here's another long pause. So in ZBrush, I use the layers tool and create different layers for all the different mouth and eyebrow deformations. So these are morph targets, and then I pull them back into 3ds Max and use that on the original head to make morph targets and facial animation. So I'm doing the eyes closed here, pull it back into 3ds Max, and I'm just making sure that the eyes are closing fully because since it is going to be subdivided, there is going to be it does sometimes pull the mesh back a little bit, so you have to make sure that you overcompensate with the low poly version. So you'll see me messing around with that for a little bit. And I'm just exporting out different shapes. I think I got the eyes here. Yeah, there we go. So the eyes are good now. And here's a really interesting trick to mirror over. Like, let's say you have a morph target where both eyes blink and you want to divide that and just have left and right eyes blink. What you can do is you can actually create or do a clone of the mesh underneath it, and then you can use vertex painting and volume select so that only one side will deform, and then you can copy that as your left or right. Here I'm doing the eyebrows, just setting that up. It's not perfect, obviously it's the first iteration, but eventually I'll do some kind of animation of an orc talking, and they'll, you know, help me find all the problem areas there. I just YouTubed some like World of Draenor cinematics too, just to see how Blizzard does it for like orc movement for making certain mouth shapes, because, you know, I believe they're called phenomes or phonemes, I believe. Different ways the mouth moves to make certain sounds, right? And there's that awful smile again. It's so bad. It's so bad. But here's that trick. Like I said, you just vertex paint on one side and have it skin wrapped to the mesh underneath that deforms. It's a cool technique. I saw it from a video on YouTube. I can't remember which one it was though, but I'm sure if you type in 3ds Max facial animation tutorial, you'll find it. So here I'm setting up the control gizmos, and these are just splines that are attached to the bones themselves. With Cat, you can just right click on it, hit add gizmo, and then manipulate it as you want. Just know that anytime you're moving it from the pivot point, you do have to use an X-form modifier, and I do use some custom shapes just by changing the default gizmo to an editable spline, attaching my custom shape, and then deleting the original one. So that's how the shoulders at the top are done. Here, once again, I forgot that the capture is on. You can see the clock in the bottom right. I have a pre-built facial animation controller set that I just imported back in here, and basically all it is just splines, like squares and smaller squares, and they're set up with float limits to make sure that they don't go out of the bounds of the control objects. And I'm going to pull up the reaction manager here, and all reaction manager does, it seems intimidating, but it's very simple. You're having one thing in 3ds Max control another. So for example, for the eyelids, when they're in their top position, I basically have that controller connected to the morph target that is responsible for blinking. So when it's in the up position, the eye is at 0 morph target, and when it's in the down position, the eye is at 100% morph target. So it's a pretty simple system. It looks complicated, but it's really not. The eyes were probably the most complex ones, so that button is actually controlling the X and Y rotation of an object inside the head that controls the rotation for the eyes. And the switch above it is what I use to lock onto like a world target, and that's just from switching a value on a position constraint. Here I'm just testing out all the different stuff, and I'm looking at some cool armor I want, exporting that all out and getting that ready. If you Google WoW OBJ exporter, you'll get the program that I'm pulling up here, and you can find all the different kinds of armor and stuff in there. It's a really great program. Pulling up Wowhead for references, for weapons. I really liked that axe. I had a bit of a hard time finding it, and then I realized it's because the prefix is axe. The program that I'm using to mostly process the textures and like convert them is XNView. You can just Google that and download it, and if you Google BLP convert, you'll get a BLP converter as well. BLP converter is good because it keeps the alpha channel for certain materials, so some of them in WoW have alpha channels. Here I'm just setting up materials for the axe. So I pulled it in Photoshop and painted on some white areas. That's where I want it to be more reflective, and I did the emission as well. I use Redshift as my renderer. It's a GPU renderer. It's by far the fastest solution that I've come up with. And the axe is just skinned to a point helper, and the point helper is attached or link constraint to the hand. And right here I'm setting up smoothing groups for the shoulders because I don't want the shoulders to look overly smooth because it's supposed to be metal. So I want to make sure I keep those edges rigid. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just changing the smoothing groups and pulling it back into Photoshop. A neat little trick that I found that just makes WoW textures look a little bit better is if you pull them into Photoshop and change the image size to 200% increase size, and then go to filter, stylize, diffuse filter, it's hard to explain what it does. It kind of blurs the image a little bit, but it maintains a lot of quality and gets rid of a lot of the pixelation, because most WoW like shoulder armor is 256 by 256. So if you can pull that up to 512 by 512, you'll get a nice bump. And you'll see I do that with all the different armor sets. Here I'm just pulling in the armor and affixing it to the character's texture. The reason I do it like this in sections is so I have control over the armor, and I can always like swap it in or out, and I don't have to keep running to WoW Model Viewer to export textures out. And just unhiding some hair, changing it to gray, and setting up all the textures and everything like that. I want to make sure that I get certain parts reflective. You'll see I messed around with some textures for a little bit here. I'm just once again blocking out where I want the very reflective parts to be, and I'm just kind of wearing it down so it looks like, you know, weird, rusty, weird metal, or time-worn metal. I'm still going to need to mess with it more, and I didn't finish the chest, but it's just a cool little thing that I decided to try. I haven't done it before. And yeah, you can see me still messing around with that. Just doing some test renders, making sure everything looks good. Here I'm actually skinning the other geometry to it. A lot of it you can just use a skin wrap. Other things you're gonna have to skin manually, so the big boot at the bottom, I had to do that. And right here I'm setting up controllers for the shoulder. So these inner controllers are orientation controlled to the shoulder and the upper arm, and then I have another one that I call a fine control that's linked to the original one, but I can control it itself. So it has a bit of movement from the upper arm and the shoulder, and then I can animate on top of it. So yeah, that's all the footage. It was 12.5 hours. It was quite long. I do apologize if I skipped over a lot of things and went a bit too fast, but you know, it's 12 hours worth of footage. What do you want me to do? So yeah, I hope this helped out some people, and kind of a glimpse into what I do with my WoW models to get them to look the way they do. I hope you guys learned something and enjoyed it, and take care. I'll see you later.